Com and go with the home team at Mississippi Farm Bureau. Our friend David Cobb joins us from CBS Sports and CBSSports.com. And we start by saying happy birthday, 30 years old today. Happy birthday. So glad that you could celebrate with us, or we could celebrate with you.
Yeah, I'm having an identity crisis, so it's nice to be among friends today. Thankfully, we're officially 4 weeks away from week 0, so that's another little carrot dangling out there to look ahead to with college football. So I'm getting by. My wife picked up a dozen donuts this morning, and they're delicious. So that's helping me cope with the tragedy of turning 30 as well.
Why is this a tragedy, David? I mean, that's cute and all, but me sitting here at 41, headed toward 42, and hey, Dad's a little older than me, and you and Borky are in the same neighborhood, but come on, man, it's not that bad.
Look, the reason it's tragic is because the excuses for juvenile behavior are all gone when you flip that first number to 3. Like, you can do all sorts of shenanigans, and people will say, "Oh, well, he's in his 20s, he'll grow up." But when you're 30 and you start acting like a fool, it's just like, wow, he needs to grow up. So that's the mourning that I'm going through.
You
couldn't be more wrong, David. I do bad things all the time, and I'm 46. Don't feel bad. Do what you want.
I dig it.
Yes, and if you can model yourself after Brian Haydad, then
don't do that.
Maybe that's not the decision to make either as you turn 30. I don't know. You retweeted Dennis Dodd's story earlier today. The teams that are potentially in the mix that might be on the radar for the Big Ten, some West Coast teams, Florida State and Miami in there to go along with Stanford and Cal. And not all of these make sense to me. I mean, Oregon makes a lot of sense. Washington makes a lot of sense. I'm not so sure about the Bay Area teams. Having a little trouble with the Florida teams. Tell me more. What are you seeing here, David?
Yeah, it seems to me like my big takeaway from what Dennis Dodd reported for us at CBSSports.com today is this idea that USC and UCLA are only going to be the first of these West Coast schools to form a West Coast nucleus of the Big Ten. I think that's the part of it that makes the most sense to me, is sort of establishing a broader presence out there, more so than like, oh, Stanford and Cal are going to help beef up the Big Ten's revenue with a TV contract. They're not going to do that. They're not big-time value additions if that's the direction the Big Ten goes. But what they do is they start to make it more sensible, because USC and UCLA, as we've discussed, making the trip every week in some sports across the country for games, and in some cases those being non-revenue sports, it's illogical. It makes very little sense. And so if you can kind of create a larger presence out there, then it does start to make sense, especially if Oregon and Washington would be willing to come in with a lower share of the revenue percentage-wise. And then with Cal and Stanford, athletically, probably not going to bring a ton from the football side of things in terms of viewers or success, but they jive with the Big Ten's haughty, high-minded, academic image that they like to project of themselves. So the idea of those 6 schools sort of being this nucleus or bankhead or whatever out on the West Coast for the Big Ten is the part of it that makes sense to me, beyond just having those 2 LA schools on an island out there.
All right, so you brought up the financial piece, and that's interesting to me. At first glance, the idea of a smaller share for some of your members than the others strikes me as just a terrible idea. We saw that in the Big 12. It leads to hurt feelings. It leads to dissension. It leads to competitive imbalance. And yet, Oregon and Washington, maybe they'd be on board because the number would be so much bigger than what they're going to get in the Pac-12. Maybe it does make sense. The SEC has been adamantly against that idea. Do you think there's a real possibility that the Big Ten could go down that road?
Yes, because I think at this point there are certain schools out there who would cling to any life raft thrown in their direction, even if that means entering a conference as diminished or unequal partners. Because if the Big Ten's new media rights deal, which is expected to be done in the coming weeks, is in that neighborhood of $1 billion annually or more, even a heftily reduced portion of that pie is probably still going to be a good bit more than what the payout would be in the Pac-12. And then you just throw in the looming instability of the Pac-12, and I think it would make those schools willing to take that deal. Because if you stay in the Pac-12 because you want to be the big dog out there, but then the Big 12 is sort of able to poach a couple of the schools from that league, well, now you're talking about the Mountain West Advanced Edition, where you got San Diego State in there, and maybe Boise State in there, and all of a sudden it's just a league that is not able to compete really at all with the other power conferences. So I think if that was the best option available to them, it would be. And frankly, given the status of things in the Pac-12, I do think even a diminished Big Ten membership financially would be the best option for some of those schools left out there.
Yeah, maybe there is something to that. Another thing, and I mean, it just feels like everything we talk about is comparing the SEC and the Big Ten and the way they do things right now, because those two conferences are so far outside of that. I feel like I've got it on pretty good authority that the SEC is not adding a team if their television partner is not going to provide at least a full share's worth more of money to cover the cost related to that team. Is there anything we know about, or has there been a leak from the Big Ten, as it pertains to their pending deal with Fox and whatever else they land, where those contracts would give them the ability to add more money for new teams? Or are they stuck on, if it's $1 billion, it's $1 billion, and you can decide what you do with it?
Right. Yeah, I don't know for certain on that. That'll be an incredibly interesting caveat that comes out when this new Big Ten contract is announced, because if there's language in that deal that leaves the door open for a renegotiation whenever you add members, then I think we could be considering or looking at adding teams pretty quickly for the Big Ten if they think that it would make better sense for the Big Ten to have multiple teams on the West Coast when USC and UCLA enter the conference. Then they're going to want language in the contract that would allow for a renegotiation. But if that language isn't in there, I think that's the wrong way to go, because look at the situation the ACC is in. They thought they were home free when they signed this deal through 2036. They thought it was a great deal. Now they're locked in a really bad deal for a really long time. And with how quickly everything is changing in media and in college sports, if you're locking yourself in for a long contract, either as a conference or as a school, you're doing it wrong right now. Even if you're in the Big Ten and you feel like you're in the best position of anyone in the country. So if they want to be nimble, if they want to be able to expand, then I wouldn't have language in that deal that limits in any way their ability to expand from a financial perspective.
Because we've seen how difficult it is if you're stuck for a long time like the ACC is. Are you hearing anything? I mean, when you look at that grant of rights deal, it's pretty ironclad, and there's no foreseeable way to just buy your way out of it, at least not based on the numbers we've heard. Do you buy into the idea that 8 teams from the ACC band together and say we're out so that the conference collapses and the TV deal falls apart and the grant of rights goes away? Or are the teams that are in the ACC going to be in the ACC?
I don't know that number is 8. I would suspect that there's at least 3 or 4 who would be willing to have that conversation. You look at Clemson, you look at Florida State, you look at Miami, schools that have these aspirations of winning national titles on the football field, and that can do it, have done it before. You might be able to throw Virginia Tech into that category. UNC gets tossed around a lot as being an attractive option. I'm not totally convinced that their administration has the appetite for a conference coup. But man, trying to get that number to a quorum or a majority is tough. And so I think the ACC, barring a change of opinion probably among the administrators and the presidents and the chancellors in that league at those schools, probably, as you say, ironclad in that grant of rights. And those are the schools that are the most attractive of those left. I mean, I would say Clemson, Florida State, Miami, all, in my opinion, more attractive than these schools we're hearing about as potential additions to the Big Ten, like Oregon, Washington, Cal, and Stanford. So not sure if they meet that Big Ten high-minded academic profile they like to pretend they're into. But on the field, boy, those are some big-time football brands that are kind of stuck right now in the ACC.
And even with that said, I think North Carolina is the most attractive outside of Notre Dame that's out there. We're out of time. David, happy birthday.